The gavel had not even fallen yet, and already the laughter had started. Daisy Marlowe stood alone at the front of the courtroom, her hands folded tightly in front of her, trying to keep them from shaking. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a navy blue one, bought 3 years ago from a discount store, the hem slightly frayed at the edges. Behind her, the public benches were filled with strangers who had come to watch the Marlowe inheritance case, drawn by rumors of a fortune and a family feud too juicy to ignore. Across the aisle, Deborah Ashcroft sat with the calm confidence of a woman who had never once doubted she would win. Her son Todd leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk already forming on his lips before the judge had said a single word. "Miss Marlowe," Judge Callahan said, glancing down at the papers in front of him, "you are here to contest the estate of your late grandfather, Elias Marlowe. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daisy said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And you have no legal representation with you today." "I could not afford one," she admitted. A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery. Todd did not even try to hide his grin. Deborah placed a hand delicately over her mouth, though her eyes glittered with something far from sympathy. "Of course she couldn't," Todd muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Look at her. She probably spent grandfather's money on donuts instead of a lawyer." The laughter grew louder. Daisy felt her face burn, felt the old, familiar sting of being looked at and judged before anyone had bothered to know her. She had felt this her whole life, the sideways glances, the whispered comments about her size, the assumption that a woman who did not fit a certain mold could not possibly be taken seriously. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that a courtroom would be different, that here, at least, the truth would matter more than appearances. "Order," Judge Callahan said, though without much force. He looked almost amused himself. "Miss Marlowe, without representation and without evidence to support your claim, I am inclined to dismiss this case in favor of the estate as currently filed by Mrs. Ashcroft." Daisy's stomach dropped. She had known that showing up alone, with nothing but her grandfather's old letters and a stubborn belief that he would never have left her with nothing, might not be enough. But hearing the words out loud, in front of a room full of people ready to see her fail, was a different kind of pain entirely. "Please," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "My grandfather told me himself, before he passed, that he had made changes to his will. He told me I would be taken care of. There has to be something you're missing." "Sentimental memories are not legal documents," Deborah said smoothly, rising to her feet. "My father was an old man in his final months, easily confused. Whatever he told my niece in passing conversation holds no weight in this courtroom." "Your father," Daisy said, turning to face her aunt for the first time, "was sharper at 80 than most people are at 30. You know that as well as I do." "Enough," Judge Callahan said, raising his hand. "Unless you have documentation, Miss Marlowe, I have no choice but to rule in favor of the filed estate." Daisy closed her eyes. This was it. Everything her grandfather had built, everything he had promised her in quiet conversations on his porch, about to slip away because she had no piece of paper to prove it, because she had no money for a lawyer to fight for her, because in this room, in this moment, she was nothing more than the woman everyone had already decided to dismiss. "If it pleases the court," a voice said from the back of the room, "I believe I may have exactly what is missing." Every head turned. A man had risen from the last row of benches, someone Daisy had not even noticed sitting there. He was tall, dressed in a dark grey suit that fit him with the kind of precision that spoke of money and care, his black hair combed back neatly, his expression calm in a way that immediately silenced the room. There was something about the way he moved, unhurried, certain, that made the air itself seem to shift. "And you are?" Judge Callahan asked, clearly caught off guard. "Vincent Castellano," the man said, walking forward down the center aisle. Whispers broke out immediately. Daisy did not recognize the name, but judging by the way several people in the gallery straightened in their seats, and the way Deborah's confident expression faltered for just a moment, it was clear that others did. "Mr. Castellano," Judge Callahan said carefully, "this is a private hearing. Unless you have some legal standing in this matter, I must ask you to return to your seat." "I have exactly that, Your Honor." Vincent reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope, worn slightly at the corners, clearly old. Elias Marlowe entrusted this document to me personally, 4 years ago, with instructions that it be presented only if his final wishes were ever contested in a court of law. I believe that time has come. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Daisy stared at the envelope, then at the man holding it, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "This is absurd," Deborah said, standing quickly. "My father never mentioned any such document, and certainly never mentioned this man." "Your Honor, this is clearly some kind of manipulation." "I assure you, Mrs. Ashcroft," Vincent said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel beneath it, "your father knew exactly what he was doing when he chose to keep this from you." Judge Callahan hesitated, glancing between the two of them, then finally extended his hand. "Approach the bench, Mr. Castellano." Vincent walked forward and placed the envelope in the judge's hands. As Judge Callahan broke the seal and began reading, the courtroom held its breath. Daisy watched his expression shift from mild curiosity to something far more serious, his brow furrowing, his eyes narrowing as he read line after line. "This," Judge Callahan said finally, looking up, "appears to be a legally notarized codicil to Elias Marlowe's original will, dated just 3 months before his passing." "That is impossible," Deborah said, though her voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "I would have known. I handled all of my father's affairs in his final year." "Perhaps," Vincent said, turning to look at her directly for the first time, "that is precisely why he chose not to tell you." Daisy's eyes moved between the judge, the envelope, and the stranger who had just turned the entire courtroom on its head. She did not understand what was happening, did not know who this man was, or why he had appeared at exactly the moment she needed him most. But for the first time since she had walked into this building, she allowed herself a small, fragile flicker of hope. "This document," Judge Callahan continued, "explicitly states that Elias Marlowe wished to amend the distribution of his estate, citing concerns about undue influence from certain family members. It names his granddaughter, Daisy Marlowe, as the primary beneficiary of his business holdings, his properties, and the majority of his estate, with specific conditions attached." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Todd's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by something closer to panic. Deborah's face had gone pale. "This is fabricated," Deborah snapped, though her voice wavered. "You cannot possibly accept this without verification. This man could have forged anything. The document bears the notary seal of Harold Whitfield, a licensed and well-respected notary in this city for over 30 years, Judge Callahan said. "I intend to verify its authenticity, of course, but I will not dismiss it outright based on your objection alone, Mrs. Ashcroft." Daisy felt her legs go weak. She reached for the edge of the table in front of her to steady herself, her mind racing. Her grandfather had planned for this. He had known, somehow, that Deborah would try to take everything, and he had prepared for it in secret, entrusting his final wishes to a man Daisy had never even met. "Court is adjourned until proper verification of this document can be completed," Judge Callahan announced. "We will reconvene in 1 week's time. Mrs. Ashcroft, Miss Marlowe, I expect both of you to have proper legal representation by then." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted into a low buzz of conversation. Deborah gathered her things quickly, gripping Todd's arm and pulling him toward the exit without so much as a glance in Daisy's direction. The crowd began to disperse, whispering amongst themselves, casting curious looks at Daisy and the mysterious man who had appeared out of nowhere to change everything. Daisy remained rooted in place, staring at Vincent Castellano as he approached her, the envelope now returned to him by the bailiff for safekeeping until the next hearing. "Miss Marlowe," he said, his voice gentler now than it had been in front of the judge, "I imagine you have quite a few questions." "Who are you?" Daisy asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. "How did you know my grandfather? Why would he trust something like this to you and not to me?" Vincent studied her for a moment, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes. "Your grandfather was a good man, Miss Marlowe, a rare thing in this world. He did a great deal for me once, more than I could ever properly repay. When he came to me 4 years ago and asked for this favor, I did not hesitate." What kind of favor requires this much secrecy? She pressed. What did he do for you that was so important? That, Vincent said, is a conversation better had somewhere more private. This courthouse has a great many ears, and not all of them are friendly to you. He glanced briefly toward the doors where Deborah and Todd had disappeared. Your aunt will not take this quietly, Miss Marlowe. I would advise caution in the coming days. Daisy felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the courtroom. Caution? You make it sound like there's something to be afraid of. There may be, Vincent said simply. Your grandfather built more than a business in his lifetime. He built a legacy that certain people will not want to see fall into your hands without a fight. I don't even know what business you're talking about, Daisy admitted, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. My grandfather ran a shipping company. That's what I always knew. What could possibly be worth all of this? Vincent's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Daisy saw something almost like sympathy in his gaze. There is a great deal you do not yet know about your grandfather, Miss Marlowe. Some of it will surprise you, some of it may frighten you, but all of it, I promise you, was done out of love for you and the family he wanted to protect. Protect from what? From people like your aunt, Vincent said, and from people far more dangerous than her. Daisy opened her mouth to ask another question, but Vincent had already begun to turn away, glancing at the small gold watch on his wrist. I have matters to attend to, Miss Marlowe, but I will find you before the week is out. There is much to discuss, and very little time to waste. Wait, Daisy called after him, taking a step forward. You can't just leave me with all of this. Why should I trust you? I don't even know you. Vincent paused at the courtroom doors, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite place. You don't have to trust me yet, Miss Marlowe, but you should know that your grandfather trusted me with the one thing he cared about more than anything else in this world, and I intend to honor that trust, whether you believe me or not. With that he was gone, disappearing through the heavy wooden doors and into the crowded hallway beyond, leaving Daisy standing alone in the now nearly empty courtroom, her mind spinning with questions she had no way of answering. She looked down at her own hands, still trembling slightly from the events of the past hour. An hour ago she had walked into this building believing she was about to lose everything, mocked and humiliated, in front of a room full of strangers, dismissed as nothing more than a woman too poor and too unimportant to matter. Now she stood at the center of something far larger than she had ever imagined, tied to a man whose name alone seemed to command both respect and fear in equal measure. She thought of her grandfather, of the quiet afternoons they had spent together on his porch, the way he used to tell her stories about hard work and second chances, about how the world would try to tell her she was not enough, and how she needed to prove them wrong every single time. She had always assumed those stories were about resilience in the face of judgment. Now she wondered if he had been trying to prepare her for something much bigger. As she gathered her things and made her way toward the exit, she noticed a woman leaning against the wall near the courthouse entrance, watching her with sharp, assessing eyes. The woman was striking, dressed in a fitted black coat, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot, her posture radiating the same quiet authority Vincent had carried into the courtroom. Miss Marlowe, the woman said as Daisy approached, my name is Renata Bianchi. I work with Mr. Castellano. Did he send you to keep an eye on me? Daisy asked, unable to hide the wariness in her voice. Renata's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Something like that. Your aunt is not a woman who accepts defeat gracefully, Miss Marlowe. I would suggest you be careful about where you go and who you speak to over the next few days. Is that a warning or a threat? A warning, Renata said. We do not make threats to people your grandfather cared for. Daisy studied her for a long moment, trying to read something, anything, in the woman's carefully composed expression. What exactly did my grandfather do to earn this kind of loyalty from people like you? He saved a life, Renata said simply, one that mattered a great deal to Mr. Castellano. Some debts, Miss Marlowe, are not measured in money, they are measured in something far more permanent. Before Daisy could ask another question, Renata had already turned and begun walking away, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians outside the courthouse just as quickly and quietly as Vincent had vanished inside. Daisy stood there for a long moment, the autumn wind pulling at the edges of her worn coat, feeling more uncertain and more hopeful than she had in months. Whatever was coming, she realized, was far bigger than a simple inheritance dispute. Her grandfather had left her more than money and property. He had left her tangled in a world she did not yet understand, protected by people whose loyalty ran deeper than blood, and watched over by a man whose calm exterior barely concealed the power simmering beneath it. As she walked home that evening, the mocking laughter of the courtroom still echoing faintly in her mind, Daisy found herself thinking not of humiliation, but of the strange, unshakable feeling that her life was about to change in ways she could never have predicted. Somewhere out there, her grandfather had set something in motion long before his death, a plan built on trust, on old debts, and on a stranger's promise that he would not let her fall. She did not yet know how right she was. 3 days later, a knock came at her apartment door just after sunset. When she opened it, she found no one there, only a plain white envelope resting against the frame, her name written across the front in familiar, careful handwriting. Her breath caught. It was her grandfather's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and found a single sheet of paper inside, folded neatly in thirds. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the words written there in ink that had clearly been penned months before his passing. "My dearest Daisy," it began. "If you are reading this, then the moment I feared has come to pass, and your aunt has tried to take from you what is rightfully yours. I want you to know that everything I did in my final years, I did to protect you, and to protect what our family built together. Trust Vincent. He is a man of his word, and he owes me a debt he intends to honor in full. There is more to our family's story than you ever knew, more than I ever wished to burden you with while I was alive. But now, my dear girl, it is time for you to learn the truth. Be strong, be brave, and do not let anyone, ever again, make you feel as though you are less than you are. With all my love, Grandpa Elias." Daisy pressed the letter to her chest, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, the weight of the past week crashing over her all at once. Whatever truth her grandfather had hidden, whatever world he had built in the shadows, she was ready to face it. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, mocked, dismissed. She was done letting other people decide who she was and what she deserved. Outside her window, a black car idled quietly at the curb, its presence unnoticed by anyone but her. She did not yet know it, but from this moment forward, she would never again walk alone. The story of Elias Marlowe's true legacy was only just beginning to unfold, and Daisy, penniless no longer in spirit, if not yet in fact, was about to discover exactly how deep her grandfather's world had run. Somewhere across the city, in a dimly lit office overlooking the harbor, Vincent Castellano sat at his desk, staring at a photograph of a man who had once given him back his life. Beside the photograph lay a second envelope, one he had not yet delivered, containing secrets even darker than the ones already revealed. He knew that once Daisy Marlowe learned the full truth of who her grandfather had been, and what his legacy truly meant, there would be no turning back for either of them. The battle for the Marlowe estate had only just begun, and the mockery Daisy had endured in that courtroom would soon be nothing more than a distant memory, buried beneath a much larger, much more dangerous fight for everything her grandfather had left behind. Renata's warning echoed in Daisy's mind as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep that night. Some debts are not measured in money, they are measured in something far more permanent. Daisy did not yet know just how true those words would prove to be, or how deeply her own fate was about to become entangled with a world of loyalty, danger, and secrets that stretched back further than she could have ever imagined. For now, all she could do was wait, and trust in the promise of a stranger who claimed her grandfather's final wish was to see her protected, no matter the cost. The following morning, she woke to find a second visitor waiting outside her apartment building, someone she had not expected to see so soon. Vincent Castellano stood beside his car, dressed once again in an impeccable suit, his expression unreadable behind a pair of dark sunglasses. When he saw her approach, he removed them slowly, revealing eyes that carried both determination and something that looked almost like concern. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I believe it is time we had that conversation." Daisy took a deep breath, clutching her grandfather's letter tightly in her hand. Whatever truth awaited her, she was finally ready to hear it. Vincent led her to a small, quiet cafe 2 streets away from her apartment, a place she had never noticed before despite walking past it dozens of times. The owner greeted him with a respectful nod and led them to a corner booth away from the windows, away from prying eyes. "You said there was more to my grandfather's story," Daisy said once they were seated, unable to wait any longer. "I need to know everything, Mr. Castellano, no more half-answers." "Vincent," he corrected gently, "and you are right. You deserve the full truth, not fragments of it." He folded his hands on the table, choosing his words carefully. "Your grandfather did not simply run a shipping company, Daisy. In his younger years, before you were born, he was involved in something far more complicated. A business that operated in the shadows of the law, moving goods that were not always legal, working alongside men who were not always honest." Daisy felt her stomach tighten. "Are you telling me my grandfather was a criminal?" "I am telling you your grandfather was a survivor," Vincent said. "He grew up with nothing, in a world that gave men like him very few honest paths to success. He made choices, some of them difficult, some of them dangerous, because it was the only way he knew to build a future for his family. But somewhere along the way, he changed. He built his shipping company into something legitimate, something respected. He left that old world behind, mostly." "Mostly," Daisy repeated. "What does mostly mean?" "It means he kept a handful of old friendships alive," Vincent said. "Loyalties that ran deeper than business. Mine among them. 15 years ago, I was a much younger man, reckless, careless, caught in a conflict I was not prepared to survive. Elias Marlowe stepped in when no one else would. He risked his own safety to pull me out of a situation that should have ended my life. I have never forgotten that." Daisy sat back, absorbing this new version of her grandfather, a man she had only ever known as gentle, patient, endlessly kind. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the picture Vincent was painting, and yet, somehow, it did not feel like a betrayal of the man she had loved. It felt like another layer of him, one he had chosen to protect her from. "Why didn't he ever tell me any of this?" she asked quietly. "Because he wanted better for you," Vincent said. "He wanted you to grow up in a world untouched by the one he had come from. He kept you close to the business, the legitimate side of it, but he made certain you never knew about the rest, until now." "And Deborah?" Daisy asked. "Did she know?" Something shifted in Vincent's expression, a flicker of contempt he did not bother to hide. "Your aunt knew enough to be dangerous. She married into wealth years ago, but it was never enough for her. When she saw an opportunity to control your grandfather's fortune in his final years, she took it, isolating him from old friends, managing his affairs, making decisions in his name that he never truly approved of. Your grandfather grew suspicious. That suspicion is why he came to me." Daisy closed her eyes briefly, the pieces finally beginning to fit together. "He didn't trust her. He trusted her even less than you might imagine," Vincent said. "The codicil I presented in court was drafted after he discovered she had been quietly transferring funds out of the company under his signature, funds he never authorized. He confronted her privately, but by then his health had already begun to fail. He feared he would not live long enough to fight her through proper legal channels, so he came to me instead, and asked me to protect his true wishes until the time came." "And the rest of the family?" Daisy asked. "Todd, does he know any of this?" "Todd," Vincent said, a note of disdain in his voice, "knows only what serves him. He has spent his entire adult life relying on his mother's schemes rather than building anything of his own. He will fight you, Daisy, not because he believes he deserves the inheritance, but because he has never had to earn anything in his life and does not intend to start now." Daisy absorbed this, feeling a strange mixture of anger and grief settle over her. Anger at Deborah, at Todd, at the years of exclusion and manipulation her grandfather had endured in silence to protect her, and grief for a man she thought she had known completely, only to discover there had always been more beneath the surface. "There's something else," Vincent said, his tone shifting, growing more serious. "Something you need to understand before this goes any further. What is it? Your grandfather's old connections did not end with me, Vincent said. There are other families, other organizations, who remember the man he once was, and who have taken notice of the inheritance dispute now playing out in public. Some of them are curious. Others may see an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Your grandfather's shipping company controls port access along a significant stretch of coastline, Vincent explained. Legitimate as the business is now, that kind of access is valuable to certain people who would prefer to see it fall into hands they can control or influence. If your aunt wins this case, she has already shown she is willing to be bought. If you win, and you refuse to cooperate with anyone outside the law, you become a problem for people who do not like problems. Daisy felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the cafe. You're saying I could be in danger. I am saying you should be careful, Vincent said, and that I intend to make sure nothing happens to you, regardless of what choice you make. Why? Daisy asked, studying him closely. You've already done more than enough. You handed over the codicil. You've explained everything. Why continue to involve yourself in something this dangerous? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite herself. Because your grandfather asked me to look after you, long before any of this began, and because, he paused, choosing his next words with unusual care, I find that I want to, regardless of any promise I made him. Daisy felt heat rise to her cheeks, unsure how to respond to the quiet sincerity in his voice. She had spent so much of her life being overlooked, dismissed, treated as an afterthought by people who could not see past her size or her modest circumstances. The idea that a man like Vincent Castellano, powerful and composed and clearly respected by everyone around him, would choose to protect her simply because he wanted to, felt almost impossible to believe. I don't know how to trust this, she admitted quietly. Any of it. A week ago, my life was simple, difficult, but simple. Now I'm being told my grandfather led a double life, that I have enemies I never knew existed, and that a man I met 3 days ago is willing to put himself between me and whatever danger comes next. It's a lot to accept all at once. I don't expect you to accept it all at once, Vincent said, but I would ask that you trust the part of it that matters most. Your grandfather loved you more than anything in this world. Everything he did, every secret he kept, every arrangement he made, was in service of protecting that love. I intend to honor that, whether you trust me fully or not. Before Daisy could respond, the cafe door opened, and Renata stepped inside, her expression tense as she crossed quickly to their table. We have a problem, she said without preamble, glancing at Daisy before turning her attention fully to Vincent. Deborah Ashcroft met with representatives from the Calloway family this morning. 2 hours, private meeting, off the books. Vincent's expression darkened instantly. The Calloways. What is the Calloway family? Daisy asked, looking between them. A rival organization, Vincent said grimly. One with a long-standing interest in your grandfather's port holdings. If Deborah has reached out to them, it means she is willing to trade access to those ports in exchange for their help winning this case, or worse, for their help making the case disappear entirely. Disappear how? Daisy asked, though some part of her already feared the answer. There are more ways to lose a legal battle than a courtroom verdict, Renata said quietly. Daisy felt her hands begin to tremble again, the fragile hope she had been holding onto since the courtroom suddenly feeling very small against the size of the threat now unfolding around her. What do we do? We move carefully, Vincent said, rising from his seat. Renata, I want eyes on Deborah Ashcroft around the clock, starting now, and I want to know exactly what promises she has made to the Calloways before this goes any further. Already in motion, Renata said, already turning toward the door. Vincent turned back to Daisy, his expression softening slightly despite the tension in the room. I know this is more than you bargained for. I know none of this is fair. But I promise you, Daisy, I will not let anyone take from you what your grandfather intended for you to have. Daisy nodded, though her mind was still spinning, still trying to process the sheer scale of what she had stumbled into. A week ago, she had been mocked in a courtroom, dismissed as nothing more than a poor, unremarkable woman with no claim to anything. Now she stood at the center of a conflict between families with far more power and far fewer scruples than she had ever imagined existed in her quiet, ordinary world. "There's one more thing," Vincent said as they stepped outside the cafe together, the autumn air sharp and cold against her skin. "The verification of the codicil. Judge Callahan will need to speak with the notary who witnessed your grandfather's signature. I've already arranged for Harold Whitfield to testify at the next hearing, but I want you to be prepared. Deborah's legal team will attempt to discredit him, discredit the document, discredit anything they can find." "What if they succeed?" Daisy asked. "What if the judge doesn't believe the codicil is real?" "He will believe it," Vincent said, with the quiet confidence of a man who did not make promises lightly. "Because it is real, and because I intend to make certain nothing stands in the way of the truth being heard." Daisy studied him for a long moment, the wind pulling loose strands of hair across her face. "You keep saying you intend to protect me, to make certain things happen. But you can't control everything, Vincent. Not the judge, not the Callaways, not my aunt's desperation." "No," he admitted, "I cannot control everything, but I have spent a great deal of my life learning how to tilt circumstances in the direction I need them to go. And I promise you, Daisy Marlowe, I have never wanted anything to go the right direction more than I want this." There was something in the way he said her name, something quiet and deliberate, that sent a warmth through her chest, despite the cold and the fear and the uncertainty of everything happening around her. For the first time since her grandfather's passing, she did not feel entirely alone. That evening, alone in her apartment once more, Daisy pulled out an old photo album she had not opened in years, searching through faded pictures of her grandfather in his younger days. She found one she had never paid much attention to before, a photograph of Elias standing beside several other men near the docks, all of them dressed in simple work clothes, their expressions guarded, watchful. She studied their faces for a long time, wondering how many secrets had been buried in that photograph, how many stories her grandfather had carried silently for decades to keep her safe from a world he never wanted her to know. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously, her heart skipping when she saw the words displayed on the screen. "Stay away from Vincent Castellano, or you will lose far more than an inheritance." Daisy stared at the message for a long moment, her hands trembling as the full weight of Renata's earlier warning settled over her. Whatever was coming, it was clear now that the courtroom battle over her grandfather's estate was only the beginning of a much larger, much more dangerous fight, one that had already begun reaching into the quiet corners of her ordinary life and pulling her toward a world she had never asked to be part of. She thought of Vincent's promise, of the quiet certainty in his voice when he told her he would not let anyone take from her what her grandfather intended. She thought of her grandfather's letter, the words "Trust Vincent" written in his careful, familiar hand, and she thought of herself, standing alone in that courtroom just days before, mocked and dismissed by people who believed she was too small, too poor, too insignificant to matter. She was done being underestimated. With trembling but determined hands, she typed a single reply to the unknown number before turning off her phone entirely. "I am not afraid of you." It was, she realized, the first time in a very long while that she had truly meant those words. Outside her window, unseen in the darkness, a car idled quietly at the curb, exactly as it had every night since Vincent's men had begun their watch. Daisy did not know it yet, but she was no longer facing this fight alone, and the people circling her from the shadows, both friend and enemy alike, were about to discover that the woman they had underestimated in that courtroom was far stronger than any of them had given her credit for. The threatening message stayed with Daisy through the following days, a cold weight sitting in the pit of her stomach every time she stepped outside her apartment. She had told Vincent about it immediately, and within hours, 2 of Renata's people had taken up quiet positions near her building, close enough to watch, far enough not to draw attention. "You should not be alone right now," Vincent had told her over the phone that night, his voice tight with restrained anger. "Not until we know exactly who sent that message and what they intend." But Daisy had insisted on continuing her routine as much as possible. She still had a part-time job at a small bookstore downtown, still had bills to pay and a life to maintain, regardless of the storm gathering around her. She refused to let fear turn her into a prisoner in her own home. It was on her walk to work 3 days later that she first noticed the man following her. He was unremarkable at first glance, dressed in an ordinary grey coat, keeping enough distance that she almost convinced herself she was imagining things. But when she paused at a crosswalk and he paused as well, lingering just a beat too long near a shop window that displayed nothing of particular interest, her instincts sharpened into alarm. She quickened her pace, cutting through a narrow side street she knew led toward the bookstore, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she glanced back, the man had closed the distance between them considerably, no longer bothering to hide his interest. Her phone was in her hand before she consciously decided to reach for it, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number Vincent had given her for emergencies. "Daisy," Renata's voice answered instead, sharp and alert. "Someone's following me," Daisy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Grey coat, older man. I'm near 5th and Larkin. Stay on the line and keep moving toward a public area," Renata instructed immediately. "I have someone 2 minutes out." Daisy pushed forward, weaving through the growing morning crowd, her eyes darting between storefronts, searching for anywhere safe to duck into. The man behind her matched her pace, no longer bothering to disguise his pursuit. A black car pulled up sharply along the curb beside her, and for one terrifying moment, Daisy thought her worst fears had come true. Then the passenger door swung open, and she saw Renata's face, tense and focused, gesturing urgently. "Get in!" Daisy did not hesitate, scrambling into the car as Renata pulled away from the curb, tires screeching slightly against the pavement. Behind them, the man in the grey coat had stopped, watching the car disappear down the street with an expression Daisy could not read from this distance, though something about his stillness sent a fresh wave of fear through her. "Are you hurt?" Renata asked, glancing at her briefly before returning her attention to the road. "No," Daisy managed, her hands still shaking in her lap. "Just frightened." "Who was that?" "I don't know yet," Renata admitted, "but I intend to find out." Vincent was waiting for them when they arrived at a building Daisy did not recognize, a converted warehouse near the harbor that served, she quickly realized, as one of his primary places of business. The interior was nothing like she expected, modern and sleek, filled with quiet efficiency rather than the menace she had half feared. "Are you certain you're unharmed?" Vincent asked the moment she stepped through the door, his eyes scanning her with obvious concern. "I'm fine," Daisy said, though her voice betrayed the lingering fear beneath her words. "Just shaken." Vincent's jaw tightened, a flash of barely controlled anger crossing his features before he mastered it. "This ends now. I should have insisted on protection detail the moment that message arrived." "I didn't want to become someone who needs constant protection," Daisy said quietly. "I've spent my whole life being told I couldn't handle things on my own. I didn't want to prove them right." Vincent's expression softened, something gentler replacing the anger. "There is no shame in accepting help, Daisy. Especially when the danger is real, and especially when it has nothing to do with your own strength or capability." "He's right," Renata added, setting down a folder she had been carrying. "I pulled the footage from the security cameras near where you were followed. I recognized the man. His name is Dutch Halloran, a known enforcer who has done work for the Calloway family in the past." Vincent's expression hardened further. "So they've moved beyond quiet meetings with your aunt." "It appears so," Renata confirmed. "What do they want?" Daisy asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. "To frighten you into withdrawing your claim," Vincent said, "or failing that, to remove you from the equation entirely." The bluntness of his words sent a chill through Daisy's entire body. "Remove me." "I will not let that happen," Vincent said, his voice low and fierce. "But I need you to understand the seriousness of what we are dealing with. This is no longer simply a legal dispute over an inheritance. This is a matter of your safety, and I intend to treat it as such, whether you are comfortable with the arrangement or not." Daisy studied him for a long moment, torn between her instinct toward independence and the very real fear still coursing through her veins. Finally, she nodded. "All right, what do you need me to do?" "For now, you will stay here," Vincent said. This building is secure, monitored around the clock. Renata will handle arrangements for your work and any other obligations you have. I know it is not the life you are used to, but it is the safest option available, while we continue building the case against your aunt." "For how long?" Daisy asked. "Until the hearing," Vincent said. "1 week. After that, regardless of the outcome, we will need to reassess." Daisy nodded slowly, trying to absorb the sudden shift in her circumstances, the strange new reality of living under guard, in a stranger's world of loyalty and danger. And yet, standing there in Vincent's quiet, controlled presence, she found that the fear gripping her chest had begun, slowly, to loosen its hold. Over the following days, Daisy settled into an uneasy rhythm within the walls of Vincent's building. She spent her mornings reviewing documents with Renata, learning more about her grandfather's business dealings, the legitimate empire he had built alongside the shadows of his past. She spent her afternoons in quiet conversation with Vincent, who, despite his intimidating reputation, revealed himself to be thoughtful, measured, and surprisingly gentle in the way he spoke to her. "Tell me about him," she said one evening, as they sat together in a small sitting room overlooking the harbor, the city lights beginning to flicker on in the distance. "My grandfather, the version of him you knew." Vincent considered the request for a long moment before answering. He was patient, even in the world he came from, a world that rewarded ruthlessness and quick decisions. He always took his time. He believed that most conflicts could be resolved without violence, if people were simply willing to talk long enough to understand one another. "That sounds like the grandfather I knew," Daisy said softly. "He spoke of you often," Vincent continued. "Even in the years before I met you, he would tell me about his granddaughter, how bright she was, how kind, how she deserved a life free from the burdens he had carried. I think, in many ways, protecting you from his old world was the thing he was proudest of." Daisy felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and yet here I am, tangled in it anyway. "Not because he failed," Vincent said gently. "Because your aunt's greed forced his hand. He never wanted this for you, Daisy. But faced with the choice between watching Deborah steal everything he built, or asking an old friend to protect his true wishes, he chose to fight, even from beyond the grave." Daisy was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights of the harbor reflect against the dark water below. "I keep thinking about how different my life would have been if he had told me sooner, if I had known who he really was. Would it have changed how you loved him?" Vincent asked. "No," Daisy said immediately, without hesitation. "Nothing could change that." "Then perhaps it does not matter," Vincent said. "The man who raised you, who loved you, who protected you at every turn, that man was real, regardless of the secrets he carried. The rest is simply context." Daisy looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the quiet strength in his posture, the careful intelligence behind his dark eyes, the unexpected gentleness he had shown her since the moment they met. "You're not at all what I expected," she admitted. A faint smile touched the corner of Vincent's mouth. "Neither are you." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them acknowledged aloud, until Renata's brisk footsteps echoing down the hallway broke the spell. "We have news," Renata said, stepping into the room with a tablet in hand, her expression grim. "Deborah has finalized an arrangement with the Calloway family, in exchange for their assistance discrediting the codicil and ensuring the case is dismissed. She has agreed to grant them preferential access to the port facilities once she gains control of the estate." "How certain are you?" Vincent asked, all traces of the earlier warmth vanishing instantly, replaced by sharp focus. "Confirmed through 2 separate sources," Renata said. "The arrangement was finalized this afternoon." Vincent rose from his seat, pacing toward the window, his jaw set with quiet fury. "Then they will move quickly, likely before the hearing, to eliminate the need for a legal fight entirely." "Move how?" Daisy asked, though she feared she already knew. "They will try to discredit Harold Whitfield before he can testify," Vincent said. "Or worse, ensure he never makes it to the courtroom at all." "We need to get to him first," Renata said. "Already ahead of you," Vincent said, already reaching for his phone. "I want him moved to a secure location tonight, along with the original notarized documents." I will not let them silence the one man who can verify the truth of that codicil. As Vincent stepped into the hallway to make arrangements, Daisy sat alone with Renata, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just heard. This is spiraling out of control, she said quietly. It has always been out of your control, Daisy, Renata said, not unkindly. The moment your grandfather chose to hide the truth of his past, this outcome became inevitable. The only choice left to you now is how you respond to it. And how do you suggest I respond? Renata studied her for a long moment, something almost like respect flickering behind her sharp gaze, with the same strength your grandfather saw in you, the strength that made him trust you with everything he built, even knowing the danger it might bring. Daisy absorbed this, feeling something steady and resolute settle over the fear still lingering in her chest. She thought of the courtroom, of the mocking laughter, of Deborah's cold confidence and Todd's cruel smirk. She thought of her grandfather's letter, of his final wish that she be strong, be brave, and never again allow anyone to make her feel as though she was less than she was. Then let them come, Daisy said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. I am done being afraid. Later that night, as the building settled into quiet, Daisy found herself standing on the small balcony outside her temporary room, staring out at the harbor lights reflecting against the dark water. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Vincent approaching, his expression unusually open in the soft evening light. Whitfield is secure, he said, along with the documents. Nothing will happen to either before the hearing. Thank you, Daisy said softly. They stood together in silence for a long moment, the cold night air settling comfortably between them. You did not have to do any of this, Daisy said finally. Take me in, protect me, fight a war that isn't even yours. It became mine the moment your grandfather asked me to look after you, Vincent said. Then, after a pause, quieter still, and it became something else entirely the moment I actually met you. Daisy turned to face him fully, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. What do you mean? Vincent studied her for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. I mean that I have spent 15 years honoring a debt to a man I respected deeply. But somewhere along the way, protecting his granddaughter stopped feeling like an obligation and started feeling like something I simply wanted to do. The space between them felt suddenly very small, the tension of the moment thick with things neither of them had yet said aloud. Daisy did not move away, and neither did Vincent, the quiet harbor night stretching around them as something unspoken but undeniable settled into place. We should discuss the hearing, Vincent said finally, breaking the moment with visible reluctance. There is still much to prepare. Yes, Daisy agreed, though neither of them moved for several long seconds more. Whatever was building between them, Daisy realized, was only going to grow more complicated as the danger around them intensified. But for the first time since she had walked into that courtroom and been mocked by strangers who believed her insignificant, she found herself unafraid of what came next, standing beside a man who saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had before. The hearing was 4 days away, and somewhere across the city, Deborah Ashcroft and her newfound allies were preparing to ensure Daisy never made it that far. 2 days before the hearing, a message arrived that changed everything. Renata brought it to Vincent's office personally, her expression tighter than Daisy had ever seen it. The Callaways want a meeting, she said. Tonight, neutral ground, their terms. About what? Vincent asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. About Daisy, Renata said, specifically. Daisy, who had been reviewing documents at the far side of the room, looked up sharply. Me? What could they possibly want to discuss with me? An offer, Renata said. According to my source, Marcus Calloway wants to propose a settlement directly. He believes, given the danger surrounding this case, that you might be more receptive to reason than your grandfather's old friend. Vincent's expression darkened. He wants to bypass me and pressure her directly. That's my read as well, Renata confirmed. Absolutely not, Vincent said immediately. I will not allow Daisy anywhere near Marcus Calloway. I want to hear what he has to say, Daisy said, surprising both of them. Vincent turned to her, disbelief evident on his face. Daisy, this is not a man you negotiate with casually. The Calloway family has a history of violence that makes even my own associates cautious. Then I'll be cautious too, Daisy said, standing firm despite the fear coiling in her stomach. But I'm tired of other people deciding what's best for me without my input, Vincent. This is my fight, my grandfather's legacy. If this man wants to make me an offer, I want to hear it myself, and I want to be the one who decides how to respond. A tense silence settled over the room. Vincent studied her for a long moment, something like reluctant respect flickering behind his frustration. If you insist on this, I will be there. Every step, no negotiations without me present. Agreed, Daisy said. Renata glanced between them, then nodded slowly. I'll arrange the meeting. Public location, plenty of witnesses. I don't trust Marcus Calloway not to attempt something if we hand him too much privacy. The meeting was set for a restaurant near the waterfront, a place chosen deliberately for its open layout and steady flow of patrons. Daisy arrived flanked by Vincent and two of his most trusted men, her heart pounding steadily beneath the calm exterior she forced herself to maintain. Marcus Calloway was already seated when they arrived, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and cold, calculating eyes that assessed Daisy the moment she sat down, as though weighing her worth in some invisible ledger. "Miss Marlowe," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet. You said you had an offer," Daisy replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "Straight to business. I admire that." Marcus leaned back in his seat, glancing briefly at Vincent, before returning his attention to Daisy. "Your grandfather's estate includes significant port access along the northern coastline. Access that would be quite valuable to my organization. Your aunt has already agreed to grant us preferential terms in exchange for our assistance, ensuring her victory in this dispute." "I'm aware," Daisy said flatly. "Then you understand the position you're in," Marcus continued. "Should you win this case, and continue to refuse any cooperation with organizations such as mine, you will find yourself facing considerable difficulty that could easily be avoided." "Are you threatening her?" Vincent asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I am offering an alternative," Marcus said smoothly. "Miss Marlowe, should you agree to grant my organization the same terms your aunt has promised, I would be more than willing to withdraw my support from her case entirely. In fact, I would ensure your victory rather than her defeat." Daisy stared at him, understanding the full weight of what he was proposing. He did not care who won the inheritance, only who was willing to grant him what he wanted. Her grandfather's legacy, the honest business he had built after leaving his old life behind, reduced to nothing more than a bargaining chip in a game of power between men who cared nothing for what it truly represented. "My grandfather spent decades building a legitimate company," Daisy said, her voice steady despite the anger building beneath it. "He left behind the world you represent because he wanted something better, something honest. I will not undo everything he worked for just to make my life easier." Marcus's expression flickered with something between amusement and irritation. "Sentiment is a costly luxury, Miss Marlowe, one your aunt does not share." "Then perhaps that's exactly why my grandfather chose me instead of her," Daisy said. A tense silence fell over the table. Vincent watched her with an expression she could not fully read, something between pride and concern, while Marcus studied her with renewed, calculating interest. "You understand," Marcus said slowly, "that refusing my offer does not end this conflict. It simply means I will continue supporting your aunt's efforts to remove you from the equation entirely." "Then I suppose we'll be fighting this the hard way," Daisy said, refusing to let the fear in her chest show in her voice. Marcus rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. "A pity. I had hoped you might prove more practical than sentimental." He glanced at Vincent one final time. "You've chosen an interesting woman to protect, Castellano. I wonder if her principles will still seem so admirable once the consequences arrive." He left without another word, disappearing into the busy waterfront crowd outside, leaving Daisy trembling slightly in the aftermath of the confrontation. "You did well," Vincent said quietly, once Marcus was gone. "Better than well. You held your ground against a man who has broken far stronger people than you." "I meant every word I said," Daisy replied, though her voice shook slightly with the release of adrenaline. "I won't sell out everything my grandfather built. Not for safety, not for anything." "I know," Vincent said, something warm and unmistakably proud in his gaze. "That is precisely why I am not going anywhere, regardless of what Marcus Calloway decides to do next." They left the restaurant together, the night air cold against Daisy's flushed skin, her mind still racing with the confrontation. As they walked toward the waiting car, Vincent's hand found hers, a simple, grounding gesture that steadied her far more than she expected. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "I need you to know that I am not simply fulfilling a promise to your grandfather anymore. I am here because I choose to be, because of you, not because of any debt I owe." Daisy looked up at him, the noise of the waterfront fading into the background as she absorbed the sincerity in his words. "I'm frightened, Vincent, of what's coming, of losing everything my grandfather built, of losing the people I've only just begun to trust." "You will not lose me," Vincent said firmly. "Whatever else happens, that much I can promise you." The moment was interrupted by the sudden screech of tires, a dark van pulling sharply against the curb just ahead of them. Vincent's expression shifted instantly, protective instincts overriding everything else as he pulled Daisy behind him, his hand moving beneath his jacket. The van's side door slid open, but instead of the attack Daisy feared, Renata emerged, her expression urgent. "We need to move now." "What's happened?" Vincent demanded. "Harold Whitfield," Renata said. "The safe house was compromised 20 minutes ago. He's alive. We got him out in time, but they knew exactly where to find him." Vincent's jaw tightened, fury radiating from every line of his body. Someone talked. "I have a suspicion," Renata said grimly, "but I need more time to confirm it. Where is Whitfield now?" Daisy asked, fear tightening around her heart at the thought of losing the one witness who could prove the truth of her grandfather's final wishes. "Secure, for now," Renata said, "but we need to move both of you somewhere entirely new, somewhere no one on the inside knows about." As they climbed into the van, the city rushing past in blurred streaks of light, Daisy found herself gripping Vincent's hand tightly, drawing strength from the steady, unwavering presence beside her. The Calloways had made their intentions clear. Deborah's desperation had crossed into something far more dangerous than a simple legal dispute. And somewhere within Vincent's own organization, someone had betrayed their location, proving that even the safety she had come to rely on was no longer guaranteed. 2 days, Vincent said quietly, staring out the van's window at the passing city. 2 days until the hearing. We simply need to survive until then. Daisy nodded, though the words did little to calm the storm of fear and determination warring within her. She thought of her grandfather, of the quiet strength he had shown throughout his life, of the letter urging her to be strong, to be brave, to never again let anyone convince her she was less than she truly was. Whatever came next, she was determined to see this fight through to the end, not simply for the inheritance, not simply for justice against her aunt's betrayal, but for the truth of who her grandfather had truly been, and for the future she was only just beginning to imagine, alongside the man who had refused to let her face any of it alone. The van sped through the darkened streets toward an uncertain destination, carrying with it the fragile hope that 2 days from now, in a courtroom full of people who had once mocked her without mercy, Daisy Marlowe would finally reclaim everything that had always been rightfully hers. The new safe house was a quiet townhouse on the edge of the city, unremarkable from the outside, heavily secured within. Daisy spent the following 2 days in a state of restless anticipation, alternating between reviewing testimony with Renata and stealing quiet moments with Vincent, both of them acutely aware that whatever peace they had found together might soon be tested beyond anything either of them had prepared for. On the morning of the hearing, Daisy dressed carefully, choosing a simple grey dress Renata had brought for her, modest but dignified, nothing like the second-hand outfit she had worn the first time she stood before Judge Callahan. This time, she was not walking into that courtroom alone, unprepared and unprotected. This time, she walked in with truth on her side, and people who believed in her standing at her back. Harold Whitfield sat quietly in the front row of the gallery, flanked by two of Vincent's most trusted men, his presence alone enough to send a visible ripple of unease through Deborah and her legal team when they entered the courtroom. Todd's earlier smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by nervous glances toward the exits, as though some part of him already sensed the tide had turned against them. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Callahan entered, taking his seat at the bench with the same measured composure he had shown at the previous hearing. "Court is now in session for the continuation of the Marlowe estate matter. Before we proceed," Judge Callahan said, "I want to address the verification of the codicil presented at our last hearing. Mr. Whitfield, please approach." Harold Whitfield rose and made his way to the witness stand, his hands steady despite the danger he had narrowly escaped just 2 nights before. Deborah's legal counsel, a sharp-faced man who had clearly been well compensated for his services, rose immediately. "Your Honor, before Mr. Whitfield testifies, I would like to submit evidence questioning his credibility as a witness," the lawyer began. "Proceed," Judge Callahan said, though his tone carried a note of skepticism. "Mr. Whitfield's notary license was suspended for a period of 6 months, 11 years ago, due to procedural irregularities," the lawyer said, presenting a document to the court. "This raises significant concerns about the validity of any documents he has notarized since." Harold, unshaken, addressed the court directly. "Your Honor, if I may, that suspension was the result of a clerical filing error on the part of my office assistant at the time, not any impropriety on my part. My license was fully reinstated within the stated period, and I have notarized documents without incident for the 11 years since. I would be happy to provide the reinstatement documentation, which I have brought with me today." He produced a folder from his briefcase, handing it forward to be reviewed. Judge Callahan examined the papers carefully, his expression giving little away. "This appears to satisfy my concerns regarding Mr. Whitfield's credibility," the judge said finally. "Objection noted, but not sufficient to disqualify his testimony." Deborah's lawyer sat down, visibly frustrated, while Deborah herself shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her carefully composed exterior beginning to crack. "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Callahan continued, "please describe the circumstances under which you notarized the codicil to Elias Marlowe's will." "Certainly, Your Honor," Harold said. "Mr. Marlowe came to my office alone, of sound mind and clear intention, roughly 4 months before his passing. He explained that he wished to amend his existing will to reflect concerns he had developed regarding the management of his estate. I reviewed the document with him personally, confirmed his identity and his mental competency to the best of my professional judgment, and witnessed his signature myself before applying my seal." "And you are confident this was Mr. Marlowe's genuine and voluntary wish?" Judge Callahan asked. "Without question, Your Honor," Harold said firmly. "He was lucid, deliberate, and entirely certain of his intentions. He specifically asked that the document be kept confidential and entrusted to a third party, out of concern that certain family members might attempt to interfere with his wishes." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Deborah's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence entirely evaporated. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield," Judge Callahan said. "You may step down." As Harold returned to his seat, Judge Callahan turned his attention to the courtroom at large. "Given the testimony provided and the documentation verifying Mr. Whitfield's credentials, I am satisfied that the codicil presented is a legitimate and legally binding amendment to Elias Marlowe's will." Deborah shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. My father was elderly and vulnerable in his final months. Even if this document is genuine, it could easily have been the product of manipulation or diminished capacity." "An interesting claim," Vincent said, rising from his seat in the gallery, "particularly given the testimony I am prepared to offer regarding the true nature of who was manipulating whom in Elias Marlowe's final year." "Your Honor," Deborah's lawyer objected immediately, "this man has no standing in this proceeding." "On the contrary," Judge Callahan said, "given his role in presenting the codicil now central to this dispute, I believe Mr. Castellano's testimony is entirely relevant." "Mr. Castellano, you may approach." Vincent walked forward with the same calm confidence he had shown at the first hearing, taking his place at the witness stand with quiet authority. Your Honor, in the final year of his life, Elias Marlowe came to me with growing concerns that his daughter, Deborah Ashcroft, was systematically isolating him from friends and business associates while quietly transferring funds from his company accounts without his authorization. Objection, Deborah's lawyer said sharply. Hearsay. Not hearsay, counsel, Vincent replied evenly. As I personally reviewed the financial records Mr. Marlowe brought to me, records I have since had independently audited. He produced a thick folder, handing it to the bailiff for the judge's review. These documents show a pattern of unauthorized transfers totaling nearly $2 million over an 18-month period, all occurring during a time when Mrs. Ashcroft had assumed near total control over her father's daily affairs and financial oversight. The courtroom erupted into hushed, urgent whispers. Judge Callahan flipped through the documents with growing severity in his expression, glancing up at Deborah with something far colder than the mild curiosity he had shown at the first hearing. Mrs. Ashcroft, Judge Callahan said, would you care to explain these transfers? Deborah's composure finally shattered entirely. Those funds were used for legitimate estate management expenses. My father approved every transaction. Then you should have no difficulty producing his signed authorizations, Vincent said calmly. I have found none in the records I reviewed, only your signature, acting under a power of attorney your father never formally granted you. That is a lie, Deborah snapped, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Is it? Vincent asked. He turned to address the judge directly. Your Honor, I would ask the court to subpoena the full financial records of the Marlowe estate for independent forensic review. I believe it will become clear that Mrs. Ashcroft's contest of this will is motivated not by concern for her father's true wishes, but by a desire to conceal her own financial misconduct before it could be discovered. Judge Callahan set down the documents, his expression severe. Mrs. Ashcroft, this court will indeed be ordering a full forensic audit of the Marlowe estate's financial records prior to any final ruling on this matter. Given the seriousness of the allegations now before me, I am inclined to view your contest of the will with considerable skepticism. Todd, who had remained silent throughout the proceeding, finally spoke, his voice small and uncertain. Mother, what is he talking about? Deborah did not answer, her eyes fixed forward, her hands trembling in her lap as the full weight of her exposure settled over the courtroom. Your Honor, Deborah's lawyer said, clearly attempting damage control, I would request a recess to consult with my client. Granted, Judge Callahan said. This court will reconvene in 1 hour. As the courtroom broke into a low roar of conversation, Daisy sat frozen in her seat, watching her aunt's careful facade crumble entirely before her eyes. She felt no satisfaction in the sight, only a quiet, sorrowful understanding of just how deeply greed had corrupted a family that might once have been close. Vincent returned to his seat beside her, his expression carefully neutral despite the visible tension still radiating from his shoulders. It's nearly over, he said quietly. Do you think she'll fight until the end? Daisy asked. I think, Vincent said, that people like your aunt rarely know how to stop. Even when continuing, only deepens their own ruin. The recess passed slowly, tension thick in the air as both sides prepared for the final confrontation. When court resumed, Deborah's lawyer rose first, his expression grim. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw her contest of the will, he said. In light of the evidence presented and pending further legal consultation regarding the financial discrepancies raised, a wave of relief washed over Daisy, so sudden and overwhelming that she nearly missed Judge Callahan's next words. Very well, the judge said. Given the withdrawal of the contest and the verified authenticity of the codicil presented by Mr. Castellano, this court finds in favor of Daisy Marlowe as the primary beneficiary of Elias Marlowe's estate in accordance with his final documented wishes. The gavel came down, and the courtroom, once filled with mocking laughter at Daisy's expense, now fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Daisy sat perfectly still, the words slowly settling over her, the weight of everything she had fought for finally, truly hers. Deborah rose without a word, her face pale and hollow, gathering her things with none of the confidence she had carried into the courtroom weeks before. Todd trailed behind her, casting one final uncertain glance toward Daisy before following his mother out of the room. Daisy turned to Vincent, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks, relief and grief and joy all tangled together in a way she could barely process. "It's over," she whispered. "Not entirely," Vincent said gently. "The forensic audit will take time. There may yet be further legal consequences for your aunt, but the estate and your grandfather's true wishes are secure." Daisy closed her eyes, allowing herself finally to breathe. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Deborah's financial misconduct came to light, resulting in a lengthy legal battle that would ultimately see her stripped of any remaining claim to her father's estate, along with significant legal penalties for her actions. Todd, faced with the consequences of a lifetime spent relying on his mother's schemes, found himself forced to build a life of his own for the first time, a humbling reckoning neither he nor Deborah had ever anticipated. Daisy, meanwhile, stepped into her grandfather's legacy with a quiet determination that surprised even herself. She worked closely with the company's existing leadership to honor the legitimate business Elias had built, while making it clear, firmly and without hesitation, that she would never entertain the kind of arrangement Marcus Calloway had proposed. The Calloway family, faced with her unwavering resolve and Vincent's continued protection, eventually withdrew their interest entirely, unwilling to invest further resources into a fight they could not win. Renata remained a steady, if initially unexpected friend, throughout the transition, teaching Daisy the intricacies of a business world she had never imagined herself navigating. And Vincent, true to every promise he had made since that first extraordinary day in the courtroom, remained by her side, no longer simply out of loyalty to a promise made to her grandfather, but out of a bond that had grown into something neither of them had anticipated finding. Months later, on a quiet evening overlooking the same harbor where Vincent's building stood, Daisy stood beside him, watching the lights flicker to life across the water. She thought of the woman she had been on the day of that first hearing, mocked and dismissed, certain she was about to lose everything that mattered. "I used to think being underestimated was the worst thing that could happen to me," she said quietly. "Now I think it might have been the reason I'm standing here at all." Vincent turned to look at her, something warm and unmistakably tender in his gaze. "Your grandfather always believed in you, Daisy, long before either of us knew how this would end." "And you?" she asked softly. "I believe in you too," Vincent said, "more than I have believed in anything in a very long time." Daisy smiled, leaning into him as the harbor lights stretched out before them, a future once uncertain, now settling into something steady, something hopeful, something entirely her own. The penniless woman who had once been mocked in a courtroom full of strangers had become something far greater than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined possible, standing not in her grandfather's shadow, but in the full light of the legacy he had trusted her, above all others, to carry forward.